Hello everyone and welcome. This is Shannon, owner of Shrush Design. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how I made this yard game scoreboard on a chalkboard surface with oil-based paint markers. Oil-based paint is a far more permanent option than most other paints, and the reason I used it for this project was because this was something that was going to be used outside in all kinds of weather conditions, and is also something that will get wiped off and reused over and over again. So I knew I needed something durable and long-lasting. However, this also means that it could be, and you'll see later in the video, it can be very difficult to erase any mistakes that are made. It is doable, but you have to be careful. I have a lot of tips along the way for the entire process, so even if you're not looking to make this sign in particular, or even if you're not planning on using oil-based paint, which for most projects you probably shouldn't, this tutorial can still be helpful for anyone looking to make any sign on a chalkboard. Now with all that being said, let's get to the tutorial. So first, I'm giving a time-lapsed overview of the entire process from start to finish. In the very beginning of this time-lapse, you can see me sketching out the project. I was using an app called Procreate to do this. Now, if you don't know what Procreate is, it's a raster-based drawing app specifically made for the iPad and the Apple Pencil. I'm planning on creating a video where I show all of the different ways that I use it sometime in the near future. So if you're interested, stay tuned for that in the future. Okay, so the first step was to plan out the layout, and that involves some math. So I'm going to go over that real quickly here. So the chalkboard surface itself, when I measured it, was 19 and 15/16, just shy of 20. I'm rounding that off to 19.5 for the calculations. I knew it was between 19.5 and 20, and I knew there was a little bit of leeway there that I could place somewhere, and you'll see where I place it. But for the calculation's sake, I'm just doing 19.5. So that is the small end of the chalkboard. Then the other longer end was 29 exactly. I didn't have to worry about that. So the next thing I needed to figure out was how big I wanted the border to be. So I decided just to play with 1 inch and see how that would work, if it would work with everything else. And it worked perfectly. Doesn't always happen that way, but happened this time. So it'll just be 1 inch. And that's for the border on all 4 sides, the left, right, top, and bottom. So then the vertical columns, like the one I have highlighted here, we are going to take 19.5 minus the 2 margins at the end. So we're going to minus the margins out first, and that'll give us 17.5. And then we figure out that we have 1 column on the left that's going to be the one that's labeled, and then enough room for 6, I thought. That's 7 together. The 17.5 that's left over, divide that by 7, and you get 2.5. So each of the columns is going to be 2.5 inches wide. And remember, we do have that little bit of space. I'm going to put that in the column on the left there that has all the labels in it. For simplicity's sake, 2.5 each for the vertical columns. So then the rows, and a special row on top is called the header, and we're going to see how much we had left over and see if that would be enough room. So again, I experimented, decided to try 1 inch for all the rows, and that included 20 of the labeled rows, the ones that are labeled on the left there. There's 20 of those, and then the 4 spacers in between, and then the 2 margins. So whatever was left was going to be the header, and if that would work, and turns out it did. Here's the math. So I took 29 minus the 24, which is all the rows, the labeled rows and the spacers, and that's 5, minus the 2 margins, top and bottom, and that's 3. So 3 inches tall is left for the header, and I thought that was perfect. It works out great. So we ended up with 1 inch tall horizontal rows and 3 inch tall header. And again, like I explained before, the left hand labeled column is actually going to be 2.5 inches plus the 7/16 that's left over. And really, I don't even have to measure that on the layout because I'm just going to go from the other side. I decided to do it in the middle of doing my project. You'll see me actually make an extra line and then I have to erase it, but not a big deal. So the first thing to do when starting this project after the layout is to prep your chalkboard surface. So you need a piece of chalk and a cloth. And if you've never seen this done before, or you don't know why to do it, you just take a piece of chalk and run it all over the surface on like the lengthwise side of the chalk. And then just wipe it off with a cloth when you're done. And you're just going to run the chalk all over the surface to make sure that the whole surface is filled with dust. It's called seasoning your chalkboard. And then after you are done, you just wipe it off and there's a little bit of a film dust on there, and it helps prevent ghosting. Chalk markers or the regular chalk sometimes too can leave behind a ghost after you try to erase it. No matter how hard you try to get it off, it will still be there and you kind of see it in the background. So usually when you do the seasoning, it helps with that. And so far, nothing's happened to my board. Here I am doing the seasoning on the chalkboard. Again, I'm just running a piece of chalk over the entire surface, spreading that dust around to prevent ghosting. And then just wiping it away, and then we're done seasoning. Next, we're going to sketch out the layout on the chalkboard. And with this layout, we have a lot of lines we have to make. For this, you'll need, I say either a yardstick or a T-square. I use both. I use the T-square more. Also, in place of a yardstick, you could use like a measuring tape or even a ruler, as long as you have a T-square, because you're going to need something as long as the board itself to be able to make a line that you don't have to stop and move and continue the line. So I recommend a yardstick and or a T-square that's long enough. And you'll see how I use the T-square. You can hang the T-square on like the edge of the board there, and then it'll be secure against the edge, and you just hold it there and you make your line against the little plastic part that's on the outside there on the length of it. It's a really useful tool if you're going to make signs a lot that are this large. Now, in order to make the lines, you're going to want either a piece of chalk again, and you can sharpen your chalk if you have one of those pencil sharpeners that has like a bigger hole in it as well. You can actually sharpen your chalk in the bigger hole. That's how you sharpen it. You'll get a cleaner line that way than using a flat piece of chalk. Another couple options you have that I had available were the Stabilo All marking pencil. It's sort of just like chalk. It's like a colored pencil actually. It's made of graphite and it's erasable off a chalkboard at least, and off of most surfaces. I use it usually to make guidelines for a lot of things. Another option also is this mechanical chalk pencil by Boheen, which is basically like a mechanical chalk pencil, like a mechanical pencil. Like you don't have to sharpen the chalk. It's got a little point. There's refillable little leads like you get with a mechanical pencil. You got the little chalks that you can put in there. So that's another option. For this project, I use the Stabilo All marking pencil, but you could use any of those or whatever else you have that is similar. So another thing you're going to want is painter's tape or masking tape. You don't absolutely need this, but I recommend having it. You'll see in a minute when we get to the video, I put tape all around the border after I drew my border in. And really, because the tape that I'm using is 1 inch wide, I could have just put the tape down and not put the lines in, but you have to make sure the tape is exactly where it needs to be, and I did both actually. And another thing I didn't have to do because I'm using the T-square, because the T-square you can use with just having markings on one side of shorter ends, not both of the shorter ends where you would need to connect with a yardstick or, a straight edge or whatever. If you have the T-square, you only need to have one marking because then it's perpendicular or it's parallel to the other surface, whatever way you're looking at it. So you'll see this in the video. But I put tape on all 4 of the borders, and then on the top, I marked off my 2.5 for each column, and I marked off my inches for the other side, the rows, except for the header, which is 3 inches, obviously. But I was able to mark that right on the tape, and I use Sharpie for that, Sharpie permanent marker. But then I don't have to, in that case, I don't have to write on the board where the lines are supposed to be. That would be more to erase later, but technically you could do that if you don't have tape. But I have tape and I find it easier to do it that way. And then I said pencil chalk sharpener, which I already mentioned. That also, I could sharpen my Stabilo All pencil with that too. Anyway, moving on. So here you'll see me using that yardstick to mark out 1 inch on every margin to make my inch margin around. And again, I'm using the Stabilo All pencil. Then after that, I use the T-square. As you can see, I'm hooking it on the edge there. And then the rest of it makes a perfectly perpendicular line. So those are my margins. Now I'm going to put tape down, like I said. Technically, I really only had to put it on the top and the left because that's where I was marking things. But, it's extra protection from the paint too. So Not that I needed it. And like I said, this tape was an inch wide anyway, so technically, I mean, I could have used it for my margins, but you see how it gets all wrinkled sometimes and you don't have it on there quite right, so it's not really a great straight line. So it's good to mark them first anyway. So now I'm marking off, that was the header, 3 inches, and then an inch for the rest of them. And again, I could write right on the tape instead of having to write on the board. Now I'm labeling them so I know what goes where. It's mainly because of the spacers. I mean, I didn't have to label every single one because I end up taking the tape off before I even labeled the rows. But it was mainly to make sure that I knew which ones were going to be the spacer ones, because I didn't want the lines to go all the way through those, even though originally I do put the temporary lines all the way through and then I have to erase them. You'll see. If I was paying more attention, I wouldn't have done that, but not a big deal. I can erase them. But once you come to painting, then you don't want to do it. And now I'm just marking off the 2.5 inches each for each vertical column. So I'm using the T-square again to just make these lines. And these are the ones where I didn't have to make them all the way through. So if I would have done the rows first, maybe I could have just avoided putting them all the way through, but not a big deal. I could erase it. Okay, there's the guidelines in. Now we're going to start painting lines. So for the line painting, I'm using the Yardstick again. Actually, I didn't use the Yardstick at all, but you could use the Yardstick. I used the T-square. I used oil-based paint markers, and the reason I did this for this project specifically was because I wanted it to be more permanent, not going to wipe away very easily, not going to get damaged very easily. But the caveat of that is that it's hard, and you'll see because I do make mistakes. It's hard when you make a mistake to fix them. It's a little harder to get it off. And luckily, this chalkboard was well made, so some of the methods I used were able to be used. Whereas if you were doing more of a homemade thing, you may have some problems, but was able to get everything off that I needed to. Try to make as little mistakes as possible because I knew it was going to be hard to take the oil-based off. But I was having particular problems with the medium-sized Sharpie paint marker. It was blobbing all over the place, and if you've ever used paint markers before, you know this happens sometimes. That was the only one I really had a problem with, though. The other two were fine. I actually ended up buying the big one in the middle of my project because I didn't have one of those. So that's why I was using the medium size, and then I started trying to use it to make things bolder, and it was taking too long and it was making a bunch of mistakes. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to go grab the large one. And once I did, everything went way smoother, way faster. Should have done it from the beginning, but I didn't know I wanted my lines to be that bold. Otherwise, I would have bought it before I started the project, but everything worked out. You'll see. If you're making a chalkboard sign, you can technically use, if you even wanted a semi-permanent thing, you could do water-based paint markers as well, or acrylic. You can use those, but eventually they would wipe off as well. So that's why I wanted oil-based for this project, because it was something I'm going to be erasing, and it's going to be out in the weather, possibly out in the rain. So far, I mean, I haven't had it that long, but it's held out great. It actually didn't get technically rained on, but it got, we were at a party. I brought it over and there were kids throwing water balloons and I got a bunch of water on the board and I just came over, wiped it off. Everything was fine. Don't have to worry about, water or scraping it off unless you push too hard. Like for this project specifically, I need oil-based. I know I do, but you don't necessarily need that for your project, whatever you're making. So first thing I did was erase those lines that I didn't need, especially the ones in those spacer rows, because I wanted to make sure that I knew where those were, because if I made a mistake, I would have to try to erase it from there, and didn't make a mistake at all there. So that was great, because I don't want the lines to go all the way through the spacers. I want the spacers to be just, blank, which is why it's important to sketch this all out beforehand before you start, so you know what you want it to look like. Fill in the borders in. I'm going to do more of those when I take the tape off. And now I'm drawing the lines for the horizontal rows. Alright, now I'm going to start taking the tape off and doing the rest of the border lines. Now remember, I decided to erase that extra line there, because I added it to the left hand column there instead of the margin. Also, before you erase, make sure your paint is actually dry because you don't want to smear it. Alright, so this is the end of day 1 and I'm doing a little refining, which means I'm going to try to erase some of the mistakes I made, trying to refine the paint a little bit. You'll see that when I did that, I ended up making more mistakes that I had to fix, but it all works out in the end. Again, because this is a relatively well-made chalkboard, I was less worried about these things, but you have to be careful no matter what with these. Getting oil-based paint off a chalkboard is hard. You have to be real careful, you have to be real patient. But some things you can use are a straight blade. I actually used that blade I have there has plastic and like an actual blade in it on the other side. I used the plastic side for this because I didn't want to scrape up any of the chalkboard material in the middle. And I didn't. It turned out great. Another thing that you want to use for oil-based is the acetone, but you have to be very careful with that as well because it can damage your chalkboard surface. Again, with this chalkboard, it was a professionally made one, so I was less worried about it, but it still could have possibly ruined it. I tried to use it sparingly. One of the things that you want to try to do is to get the mistake quickly when it's still wet, if possible, or at least get most of it up. And you can do that with the cloth there or the cotton swabs. And when you do the acetone, you just want to dip a little bit. So you dip one of the cotton swabs in there just a little bit and use it. You don't want to pour it on. You don't want the cloth to be dripping with it. You just want a little bit to try to get whatever you're getting off. You'll go through a bunch of the cotton swabs if you're making mistakes because you can only get so much paint off with one and then you got to throw it out and get a new one. So have a bunch of them on hand if possible. So let's see how I fix some mistakes here. Now the fixing mistakes process also includes, refining your paint. And I was see, this is the middle size paint marker. It was just dripping all over the place, driving me crazy. And this was the first day. I actually did this over 2 days. And the second day is when I went out and bought the bigger one. All those drips, they eventually get taken care of. I don't know if you noticed right there my cat going through. It's my assistant, Chaz. He likes to, as long as he's awake, he likes to be wherever I am, trying to get my attention from whatever I'm doing. That's how he assists me. You can see me using the cotton swab there, trying to get the excess paint off. And I'm leaving the rest of the cleaning for later. So then I decided to make the lines bolder. This is going to be the second day. I left it sit for a day or two to dry, so it would be easier to try to paint over the lines. Still haven't gone out and got the bigger marker yet. I did that halfway in between. But letting it dry for a day or two, I forget exactly how much time was in between here, helped. And then being able to write on top of it, give you a more finished look. Because when you try to write on top of a line that you've already painted with a paint marker, it can just take it away. It can smear it. It's not fun. So you need to let some time to let that dry and then try it again. But even with that marker was still driving me crazy. In a little bit, you'll see I get a bigger marker. And again, I kind of decided I wanted bigger lines. I didn't know that at first. So I was trying to thicken them up by just adding a line next to it, which worked, but the pen was driving me crazy. So this is when I went and got the thicker marker. And this footage from the other camera that I had, sorry for it being blurry, that camera was driving me crazy as well this day. Kept turning off on me randomly, and it never seemed to be in focus correctly. But some of the things, even with the blurriness, were a little easier to see from that angle, so I included it in the video. But I apologize that it's blurry. So again, more refining, cleaning. So I'm going to sketch the labels. Now what I did here was use the Stabilo all pencil to draw a line roughly down the middle. I just kind of eyeballed it this time, didn't measure. Now sketching in the words, I wanted them to be centered, so that was why I drew a line. And then I'm going to do a chalk transfer of the header. So for that, you're going to need, if you want to do it, a piece of tracing paper, or, regular paper would work too, probably. Pencil, Sharpie, possibly a yardstick or a ruler, maybe an eraser if you need to erase something. But I am just making a box the same size as the box on the sign. And then I actually did this off camera, but I wrote the rest of it. So now what I'm going to do is trace over it in Sharpie so you can see it well from the other side, especially if you're not using tracing paper. And then on the other side, flip it over and write in chalk where all the letters were, and then you put it where it's supposed to be on the board, and you go over it again on the other side with Sharpie or pencil or whatever, and that will transfer the chalk onto the board exactly where you want it to be. So then you can just trace over it with the paint. And you can see I made a little mistake over there on that first Y. The first little teardrop thing I could actually incorporate into the design on the last letter, the E. The little dot that came out, it blobbed out at the end and it made that little teardrop, and then I went and I pointed at it with the marker, and then I dripped another drip on it. I'm like, oh no. So then I wanted to paint in the actual labels there, and that was kind of more freehand. I could have technically done a chalk transfer for all that too, but I thought I could just do it, especially with having the middle line drawn in. So then for the final touches, basically just kind of oscillating between cleaning off the temporary lines and cleaning off mistakes, and then filling in places that need a little more paint. Yeah, so everything worked out really well. I was able to get all the mistakes fixed. The only thing that, if I was going to be really picky about it, some of my lines weren't exactly where they're supposed to be, so you can kind of tell if you look. Some of the boxes are a little bigger than they're supposed to be. So I should have been a little more careful about that, especially because I made them thicker. I think that's part of the problem. And another thing you should keep in mind for something like this is, I don't know if this happens to you, but a lot of times I should have left it the way it was. I do something and then I ended up messing it up more. So that happened a few times where I'm like, oh, I should have just left it. It was fine. And really, you'll drive yourself crazy trying to make this perfect, trust me. Even if I did this again, I would still, knowing like all the mistakes I made and trying to learn from them, I wouldn't be able to make it perfect, I'm sure. That's just the thing with paint markers as well. Like, you can't get the perfect finish on them no matter what you do. Especially with putting this amount of lines and paint on this sign. Like, there's no way you can get everything perfect. But I would still rather do this than put vinyl on the sign, especially for this project specifically. Even though the vinyl has a better look, a better finished look, I guess. Well, that's debatable. But the amount of weeding you would have to do for all these little boxes, and you'd never be able to get the words in there that small. There's a time and place for vinyl. This I didn't feel was it. And on top of that, even if you use the permanent vinyl, eventually it's going to wear off. And you're going to have to redo it anyway. And you'll have to redo like the whole thing, not just like touching up every once in a while, which you can do with the paint. And I think overall, it's better. Again, this is debatable, but it's better for, impact on the environment and stuff too, because you're throwing out so much vinyl when you weed it out. Especially making this sign in particular, you'd be throwing out a lot. I decided to write that over because it kind of got erased when I was fixing mistakes. So that was good enough for me. That's where I stopped it. Now I'm going to show you real quickly how to use it. So you can either use chalk or a chalk marker. If you use chalk, it's really easy to just remove it with an eraser or just a microfiber cloth like I was using. Chalk markers, you may be able to use just the cloth, but you may have to use some water, and you should be able to wash it right off the water, and the oil-based paint will stay there, and you should be able to erase the chalk marker without any ghosting because you seasoned the chalkboard. Okay, so for the demo, I have chalk marker on the left there and regular chalk on the right. Now I'm just going to wipe off the regular chalk with a cloth. Comes right off. And the chalk marker actually comes off with cloth as well. It's only been there a couple minutes. But I'm going to show you too that you can put water on and it'll come right off as well. And it doesn't damage the board. I'm going to reiterate that. Spraying a bunch of water on the board. Show you that the oil-based paint markers are not going to smear or come off in any way with the water, even if you have way more water than that. And there you go. All right, everyone. That is going to do it for this week's video. Stay tuned until the very end. I've got some bonus footage and sneak peeks for you. But first, I want to thank you, yes you, for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you found it to be helpful, use those buttons. If you want to see more, you can follow Shrush Design on social media. The links are all in the description. And if you would like to browse my online shops, I have 2 Etsy shops and a Fiverr account, also listed below. If you are local to southeastern Wisconsin, I have even more services available, so you'll want to check out my website for that information. But wait, there's more! If you happen to be planning a wedding in the near future, I have another YouTube channel called Shrush Design Weddings, through which I discuss all of the choices you'll have while planning your wedding. And I also have another channel called Poised Pencraft, through which I teach the art of lettering, calligraphy, and some graphic design skills if you want to learn how to create your own designs from scratch and make each project truly your own. Links for both of those channels are, you guessed it, in the description. So if you're all subscribed now and ready for next week's video, I'll see you then. For now though, I'll leave you with the bonus footage and sneak peeks. Enjoy! Alright, for the bonus footage for this video, I've just got a few outtakes. Not a whole lot, but the sneak peeks are probably what you're waiting for. Don't worry, they're coming up soon. But all you fans of Assistant Chaz will love this first one. Will you stop? You're gonna knock my camera over. Well, maybe that's intentional. Well, that's not. And a few more model shots by my lovely assistant. So for the sneak peeks coming up on this brand new channel, this is the very first video if you haven't noticed. I've got a lot of holiday related creative content coming up in the next few months for Halloween and Christmas. Christmas is what I celebrate, no shade to any of the other end of the year holidays. But one video that I already have filmed is my Halloween window mural that I made for decoration at my own house last year for Halloween. Luckily for me and anyone who's interested in seeing this video, I filmed a bunch of footage of the entire process. I never knew I would be posting it to YouTube. I was just doing it for my own benefit, to learn from. It was the very first mural I ever attempted. There were many beginner mistakes that I learned from and I want to share. And then for the rest of October, I'm going to be doing another window mural for Halloween this year that I'm expecting to be a big improvement. So I'm going to point out what I did differently from the year before and show how the results are different. Again, I expect it to be much better. Also for Halloween, I'm going to be making some smaller signs for some additional homemade decor for our front porch and walkway for the trick-or-treaters, and that will be another video. Then skipping over November for the time being, I have other things planned for that. But in December, I'm going to shift into Christmas mode and do another window mural for Christmas. Unfortunately, I didn't do one last year. I wanted to, but my other cat assistant, Otto, Chaz's sister, got sick towards the end of last year, and then we had to say goodbye to her earlier this year. But you'll see her a little bit in the Halloween window mural videos. She was in those. There will also be some other Christmas-related decor that I will be making and filming. And then in between all of that, I have a few other things planned. One thing is that I've started to do a wall mural in our long-term storage pantry that we have in the basement. It's a narrow nook down in the basement under our stairs, and there's an empty wall that is not being used for anything because all of the shelves are against the opposite wall, and there's no room to have shelves on both sides. You wouldn't be able to walk in there if you did. So the empty wall equals perfect spot for a mural. Why not? Especially since I want more practice. So here's a sneak peek at what I plan on putting on the wall. I'm going to tweak the design a little bit. That video may make it to the channel in November, but it also may be pushed off until next year after the holidays. I'm not completely sure about that yet. It will be on the channel by early 2023 at the latest, though. And then in between all of this, and especially starting next year, I'm going to have a lot more other things on the channel not related to holidays, more related to wedding signage, wedding decor, things for other events, and also business signage like menu boards and things like that. I'll be teaching how to make them, how I make them at least, and again showing all the different materials and methods I use. So I've got a lot planned for this channel. So if it is something that interests you, I recommend subscribing. Follow me on social media. I plan on releasing videos every week, every Wednesday, and that's all I have for now. So I'll see you next week with my Halloween video and more sneak peeks. Bye!